But let's get started. And Kate, if you could you share with us a bit about your own personal journey in your career and how you got to where you are today?
My circuitous journey to where I am today. Absolutely. And it's such a pleasure to be here. It's so nice to be on campus and in a room like this that I associate with law school, and particularly to be on this side of the, I still have dreams where I wake up and I'm being cold called, on my first day of class. So we may try and throw some questions out to the audience if we can. I started out my professional career actually as an intern analyst at CIA for a summer in college. And so in a way, though my current position was totally unexpected, came at a very unexpected time. I was working at the Department of Justice, very happily ensconced in a job there. When I got this call, it does feel, and it has felt, even to sort of a surprising degree, like a returning full circle to that very first job at the agency, just for a couple weeks over the summer.
Why did you even want to do that?
Yeah. So I knew in college that I was really interested in sort of international affairs, in comparative politics. My area of specialization in college, and for a long time thereafter, was South Asian politics. That's what I was studying. And so I'd always had this interest in foreign countries and world affairs. But the only way, if you'd asked me at the time to describe, what kind of job I wanted as a sophomore or junior in college, I probably would have said, something where my job is to stay on top of what's going on in the world. I want to just be engaged with global affairs. And I had no more specific idea than that. But CIA came and did on-campus recruiting, and it was easy back in those days. I don't know if anyone does this anymore, you signing your name up, on the door style thing. And so it was really totally random, more or less, that that obviously the CIA summer internship obviously fit that general broad description I've given you, but it was particularly unplanned. But then the job knocked my socks off. I mean, the job was, really gave me the bug, gave me the Washington bug, showed me how, something that's very true at the agency to this day, which is that, we devolve responsibility, we push responsibility down to, the lowest level at which it can be handled, competently and well. And so you see, and I see in my daily life now as general counsel, very junior officers sometimes coming in to brief the director on, some of the most important topics. And they're excellent at it. And that the sort of energy that you get and being in a place like that is part of what attracted me to it as a student, long before I was a lawyer, and certainly one of the things that I've relished about coming back.
Well, what led you to, you went to law school.
I went to law school.
And what?
Notwithstanding my efforts to put this off, which I can come to as well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because with that background, you'd think you might go to the Foreign Service or something immediately. What drew you to law school?
Yeah, so I had been planning I came from a family of lawyers. I'm not sure I was aware that there were careers beyond, paths in the law, but it was very different kind of law. I grew up in New York, so it was sort of very New York City focused practice that I'd been exposed to growing up. I knew I didn't want to do that kind of law, but sort of law school felt like it was in the cards, and I loved the program that I did as an undergrad. Actually has a name kind of similar to the name of this illustrious conference. It was a program in ethics, politics, and economics. I've always and it was really sort of focused on, global affairs through the lens of ethics, looked at through politics, the whole overlay. And a lot of people from that program went to law school, so that also seemed like a natural progression. So I applied and got into law school and made all my plans to go to law school as a senior in college, including getting an apartment and a roommate and getting all set up. And then in the summer between graduation and showing back up at Yale, I threw in a resume to a commission that was standing up. This was a blue ribbon presidential commission to investigate the pre-Iraq War intelligence failures. President Levin, Yale's President Levin was one of the commission members. And so I think I remember reading about it in the New York Times and thinking, this is super interesting. And I just finished this internship at CIA, and I'm really interested in the broader conversation that's going on right now in the wake of 9/11, as the 9/11 Commission report was finishing up its work about the reform and the overall structure of the intelligence community. And so I literally sent in a cold resume to this commission that didn't even exist yet. And they called me very much out of the blue in that summer, midsummer, and asked me if I'd come take a job as sort of one of their most junior staffers. And this was a commission that didn't have really a lot of junior staff. There were going to be 2 or 3 of us. And I said no. I immediately said no. I'm going to law school. Thanks so much for the call. That sounds really difficult. I'm in the middle of my summer plans. I was on a long bike trip at the time. I was actually in the middle of the United States on a bicycle trip. And I said, I'm kind of got something else going on. Thanks so much. And then I called my parents and I told them about this. And bless him, my dad, who knows nothing about government and does not understand for a second kind of the DC world of lawyering or federal government jobs, said, that's crazy. You've got to take the job. You've got to just say yes, jump into it. Forget about law school, figure it out. And that kind of attitude, I'm so grateful to my dad for saying that. He knew nothing about what he was really recommending. I think that was blind advice. But his attitude about, a door has opened. We don't know what this thing is. At the time, we really didn't know what the commission was. I don't even think we knew kind of who was heading it necessarily, or, who would be on it. But the attitude of sort of a door has opened for you, walk through it, take a great opportunity, and take a chance has sort of something that's stuck with me. For better or worse, it has led me to, to a bunch of moves that I wouldn't have anticipated.
Well, how'd you get back to law school?
Oh, yes. So I called the law school. I said, I'm so sorry, I want to do this. Is that okay? And in that day, I don't know if this is this the case today that you can defer, law school?
Kind of depends.
Yeah, they were starting to crack down on this. And so I deferred once because the commission only had a mandate to exist for 9 months. So I said, don't worry. It'll be over in 9 months. I'll be in the next class. The school can prepare for that more easily than some kind of indefinite arrangement. They said, okay, once is fine. Of course, at the end of those 9 months, the sort of intelligence community world had changed again. In the time that I was on the commission, the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, or IRTPA, as we call it, of 2004 was enacted by Congress in the wake of the issuance of the 9/11 Commission report. As a result of that legislation, a new position had been created to oversee all of the intelligence community agencies. This is the creation of the Director of National Intelligence, or DNI position that we now know so well. At the time, it was brand new, and there were a lot of questions about what it would be. And the commission that I was, this very junior staff member on, the commission actually had to grapple with that. So when that law came out and this change happened in the middle of our writing of the report, we all I remember that morning, we all called, an immediate, we all need to huddle in the conference room. What does this mean for our recommendations? What does this mean for the report? Stand down a team that's working on one of the chapters of the report and start thinking about this new DNI thing and what are we going to say about it? And so we ended up writing about the DNI position and thinking about the DNI position, and then taking our 70-plus, the commission's 70-plus recommendations, and at the end of the day, President Bush handed them over to the DNI to implement. And the new DNI, Ambassador Negroponte, who'd had a career at the State Department, another example of a career Foreign Service officer who, then went into the intelligence world, just like our current director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He looked to the commission and said, do you have any junior staffers who could hop over, to my office? So I got called up to do that, and I called the law school back again and said, one more, I promise. And they were very, one of many things that I credit the Yale Law School with is their commitment to public service, and they, generously allowed me to do it again. So I was able to do that for the first year of the new DNI structure being stood up. And let me tell you, it was different. It was very different back in the day. When I showed up as employee number something, I mean, I think it was single or low double digits at that time. You know, we were all camped out in a small temporary offices, all of us basically in cubicles except for General Hayden and Ambassador Negroponte, all sitting, you know, shoulder to shoulder in these tiny little makeshift cubicles in the White House, broader White House complex while we found a permanent home. And, you know, we had to figure it all out from scratch. How do you build I mean, there were existing parts of it, but it was obviously a whole new structure. You know, where do you get the trash cans? How do you do all those things? And those were the types of.
People sometimes forget that there are things like that when you're trying to do something.
There are startups in government, and if you can get a spot in one of them, it's a tremendous experience.
Well, I think you've given us, your dad gave some good advice, because sometimes you really do, especially when you're young, you have to see opportunity. So you go to Yale, but then you clerk. How did that come about?
So it all goes back to that WMD commission job. One of the co-heads, the commission's sort of staff directors were Judge Lawrence Silberman of the DC Circuit Court of Appeals, and Senator Robb of Virginia, former Senator Robb of Virginia, Chuck Robb. Judge Silberman and Senator Robb, in all of their wisdom, stacked their general counsel's office with a couple of extraordinarily talented former Supreme Court law clerks who served as the deputy general counsels. And I was so impressed, and these were the folks that I worked with most directly, them and the general counsel. And this was all before law school, of course, but they knew I was headed to law school. And it was the experience really of working with them and watching them think, write. What we were doing in that year was sort of doing lots of interviews all across the intelligence community, trying to figure out the story behind the pre-Iraq War intelligence failures and a number of other case studies that we looked at, Libya and other countries. And to see them kind of take in information in this sort of investigatorial way and process it and then write this well-written, I won't say, it was the 9/11 Commission that won the National Book Award, which is sort of this, chip on the WMT Commission's shoulder. But we thought the Commission wrote a really well-written report at the end of the day, and watching them do that work turned me on to this idea of clerking, which I'd never heard about before. And so when I then went to law school 2 years later, I had in the back of my mind very much this idea of what it was like to work for a judge. After all, Judge Silberman had been really my first boss figure. And so it was very much something already on my mind. And I had a little bit of a sense of what the DC Circuit Court of Appeals was like. And I thought, if I could ever clerk on that court, that's the place that I'd most like to learn from a judge, because I was particularly interested after all this work on sort of organizational structure and the management of the intelligence community. I was very much focused on administrative law issues. And I spent a bunch of time in law school taking admin law courses and thinking about admin law issues. So getting to clerk for Judge Garland and then Chief Justice Roberts was the honor of a lifetime.
I want to come back to your time in private practice, but I want to jump ahead a little bit. General Mattis was famously asked a number of times, what keeps you up at night? To which he responded, I keep other people up at night. And but that lawyers really can't have that kind of answer. And if you know Mattis, he's a person, a very unique person. Let me ask you that question. One of the things we do in our classes is every morning or every class we have in the news and go through what's in the news. But what keeps you up at night, if anything?
Yes. Well, my answer is certainly not General Mattis's answer. I try not to keep anyone else up at night. We're very good about work-life balance at the CIA.
Can I jump in there?
Yeah.
We were talking at dinner last night and talking about your confirmation.
Yes.
what was your situation in the
This is
confirmation?
a loaded question. My situation in the confirmation process was that I was 9 months pregnant pretty much to the day. So the day on which my hearing was scheduled had been the date of my induction this is my third child. And so, that made for kind of an interesting confirmation process. There were a lot of other things going on in my life. So I was lucky the committee was very accommodating in making sure that I could do the hearing before having our baby, who came just a couple days later. It was good to get it out of the way.
That would have been so dramatic to have an actual delivery during the hearing.
That would have been dramatic. Thankfully, it was only the QFers that I was working on in the hospital, which really was a relief not to have to prepare for the hearing at that time.
Well, what keeps you up at night other than small children?
Yes. So my children are what make me go to bed at night because I'm exhausted by the end of our long days, followed by family responsibilities. But the short answer is it all keeps me up at night. It's a tremendous responsibility that I think that everyone in my office and, at the risk of speaking for them, everyone in the agency feels. I think we feel it very palpably, in particular because we are a human intelligence agency. So, we feel in a very concrete, very individualized way the responsibility that we have for humans who are going places. We have a saying at the agency, we go places where others cannot go, and we certainly do things that others cannot do. And I think the responsibility for people and for the secrets that we keep really does kind of weigh on me in a very tangible way, and I think it weighs on all of us. I mean, the other list of issues that keep me up at night will be, no surprise, worried about what's going on in the Middle East, worried always about what's going on in Ukraine and all over the world, thinking about data and the impact that the data is having not only on our own operations, but on the interests of our adversaries who are don't hold themselves to the same standards and to the rule of law the way that we do. So all of those things, all the things you would expect weigh on me, but most of all, the sort of human element.
You mentioned data. We're in the midst of a vast technological change, and I got to hope that it's impacting the CIA and the practice of law.
Yeah.
What are you seeing vis-a-vis technology? And just as I'm also going to ask you about AI. So.
Okay. I won't talk about AI then. We'll leave that for a minute. So one of the things that when Director Burns came in as the director of the agency, he noted right away the need for the agency to be thinking and to kind of structure its thinking around key developing technologies in new ways to really bring focus. As some of you know, the agency is organized now around mission centers and directorates. So we've got mission centers that cover geographic areas of the world as well as topical areas, things like the counterterrorism. We have a China mission center. We have mission centers around areas, issue topics. And we also have directorates that are organized around more or less sort of disciplines. We've got the Directorate of Analysis, the Directorate of Operations, the Directorate of Digital Innovation. And one of the things that Director Burns did was stand up a new mission center called, we refer to it as T2, but it focuses on technology and transnational issues. And part of that focus was to kind of think about, again, bringing new ways of focus to key areas of technological development, those being, again, all the ones you would expect: semiconductors and microelectronics, advanced power, advanced computing, 5G, 6G, biotechnology, fintech, all these sort of core areas of new technology, and to think about, really looking at those as strategic areas of focus. And so this is fed down, of course, to the way that in my shop, we are thinking about getting ahead of all of the types of legal questions that our clients might ask. We'll talk about AI in a minute, but we have looked too at how can we bring the right level of technical expertise across all of our different areas of practice to the way that we advise our clients, and do we need to have people who are focused in particular just on technology and data law issues? And the answer is, yes, we do, and yes, we are doing that.
Well, since we have brought up AI, the President issued a fairly major policy statement, and I'm sure AI is impacting the CIA. What are you seeing?
Yes.
That you can share with us?
Yes, that's always a caveat. I think the EO, the historic importance of the EO should not be underestimated. Those of you who've actually read it front to back sort of see how comprehensive it is. And those of you who've read it carefully have probably also seen that it sets forth a process for doing a national security memorandum that's specifically focused on the national security applications, and that is on a little bit of a longer timeline, so that's still underway. AI is obviously an area of great focus for us, both as an opportunity and also as a challenge, as a threat vector, as our adversaries begin to use it. Director Burns gives this great explanation of kind of how this is transforming the way even that we think about our own business, the business of intelligence gathering. You take the sort of hypothetical of we walk out of after this conference room, after the conference today, you walk out, you walk down to the street to get a cup of coffee, you're scrolling on your phone, you're looking at your news feed, and you're looking at Instagram. And now imagine that, that street that you're crossing has a smart camera that's capturing you as you go, that's, potentially collecting the information on your device. And now imagine that you're not just a student walking out of this conference, but you're actually an operative going to meet with an asset. And how much does the ability to take that data then and use ML tools to analyze it in real time, instantaneously, how does that change the work that we need to do as an agency? And we refer to this sort of general phenomenon as ubiquitous technical surveillance and the challenges that are raised for our line of business by UTS, or ubiquitous technical surveillance. So once you apply AI tools to that, it could be potentially, a real game changer. So that is one of the ways that we're looking at this. I'm optimistic that the CIA can really be a leader in using these tools for our mission set. Think about the analysis work that we do and the potential value of these tools to help us find the needles in the haystack, to help us figure out the relevance and the weight and the importance of various data in that huge haystack. So, this is an area where I actually think our analytic tradecraft may be particularly useful as we as a society confront the problems, the challenge really of, dealing with issues like bias that arise from those tools. That's something that our analysts, are constantly thinking about, even in the pre-AI world, thinking about bias in analysis and information, how to ensure that all of our analytic products are unbiased and that we are transparent about, data and sourcing and whatnot. So those are things that are already core competencies for us. And so I'm particularly optimistic about the role that the agency will be able to play as these tools are adopted.
For your legal team, are you starting to look for these? It seemed to allude to it earlier, these technical specialists.
Yes.
And do you think that people who just learn about it in school, or you more looking for people who maybe been out in the world and been in the whole AI world and somehow got a law degree in that process?
So the answer is yes. The answer is yes, we're looking for all of it. So, we are, and we have had posted in the recent past or positions that are technology specific, where we are looking both, and we see incredible resumes of folks who've got real technical expertise, coming out of school or who've been practitioners. And the answer is we're looking for all of you. So wherever you are, please, please submit resumes, because, that experience, that background, technical expertise among lawyers, I found that to be tremendously valuable. Our lawyers who come from other backgrounds, not even legal backgrounds, right, but who have advanced degrees or real world experience on technology topics are immensely valuable, kind of bringing a cross-disciplinary look at legal issues. And we have to be able to, unlike the situation in a lot of law firm practices, our lawyers are talking and interacting very directly with their clients in the agency, the non-lawyers in the agency, and you have to be able to speak their language. So just as our lawyers need to be intelligence professionals and need to understand the business of intelligence, our lawyers who advise in our more technical fields have to be technologists, they don't actually need to be technologists, but they need to be able to speak the speak and walk the walk enough to understand what their clients are saying, to figure out what it is their clients are proposing to do and translate it into legal terms, without having a translator. They need to be able to do the translation, so.
Something else you mentioned earlier and does hit on the technology piece is, 702. Maybe you could explain to the audience your view of what 702 is. Is this really as important to the intelligence community as we hear from some people? We've had a couple people write on my blog about this. Some people you may know, former general counsel of the NSA, very strong advocate. But what's your view of what it is and what it's not? And is this really that important to the intelligence community?
The answer, you're teeing up a bunch of these great yes-no questions. The answer is yes. 702, in my view, is unquestionably a critical intelligence tool. I think the ways in which it's contributed to mission and... If
I could, let's give them a little bit of idea of what it is, because
yes.
Some people...
702 is a statute that under the part of the broader FISA structure that allows the United States to collect on non-U.S. targeted information on non-U.S. persons overseas, right? And there's been a lot of public discussion sort of to dispel the myths about what 702 is and is not. But I don't think that there's any question about the value that it's brought to the intelligence community. And I won't repeat what I think has been, well said about the range of our critical challenges that it's been useful against. I think the examples are well known about the value it's had in the terrorism space, the value it's had in helping us identify foreign ransomware attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure targets, value even in exposing Russian atrocities. The list goes on. So, I hope that that's something that is coming across clearly in the public debate.
Yeah, because it's set to expire, I think, in April.
That's right.
And unless we have, and the criticism is that Americans have been scooped up in this, and that the system for purging that has not been adequate. But there's been, obviously things that have been addressed by different sides to try to make it better. Getting back to what keeps you up at night, what keeps you up at night in terms of, manning the CIA General Counsel's office? Because one of the things, and we talked about this yesterday during our panel, where we did have one of CIA lawyers, a lot of our students here, they're looking at the opportunity to make, like almost $250,000 the first year that they're out of law school, and it's just mind-boggling to me. And they're making $30,000-$40,000 during the summer going to big law, which you had some time in. How is the CIA or the government or the military, just in your view, going to be able to compete with that? Because even people who really do want to serve, the money is just so tremendous But you went to private practice, and then you went back to government. And what are your thoughts?
Yes. Well, the truth is, we're not trying to, and we cannot compete with the financial incentives to go to the private sector. People don't come to these jobs for money. But what we do offer, and we really don't, since I've never really thought of our competition as being the law firms, because it is just so different what you do as an attorney in the federal government, and particularly at CIA, which is really a place, a law office like no other. You asked me what keeps me up about the management of our office. So our office is quite unusual. We've got over 200 lawyers. We also have a very talented group of law librarians and paralegals who support our work. And we hire attorneys who are coming straight out of law school and very experienced attorneys, very experienced people who've had long careers, either elsewhere in government or sometimes from firms, partners at law firms. They come in, and when they start with us, they really have to learn what we do from scratch. There are a lot of things that you just can't learn anywhere else than by being at CIA. And it takes people, even very senior lawyers, a bit of time to adjust, to learn the agency, to become really proficient in agency, and to become, intelligence professionals. But we take everyone in, and we assign them initially. We've got components within OGC that mirror the components of the agency, but that also break down according to various legal specialty areas: contract law, ethics law, fiscal law, litigation, investigations. We've got all these different shops. But unlike the practice of law at law firms, and this is a real selling point for us in the following regard, we're not asking people to become super specialized and focus only on one thing for an entire career. In fact, for the most part, we do have specialists who come in who say, I'm coming in as a senior ethics lawyer, and I want to be an ethics lawyer, and we love those people and we need those people, and they stay in our ethics law division. But most of our attorneys come because we have what we call a rotational system, whereby attorneys spend 3 to 4 years in a given practice area within OGC, and then we ask them to move and start all over again. So you might come in after having 2 or 3 years at a transactional practice at a law firm, which an experience which I value enormously, which does not have, direct applicability for the most part to things that we do. And we might put you in our litigation division to start, so you figure out how CIA manages its litigation work. And then 3 years later, you have the opportunity to apply to different positions, but then you might find yourself doing procurement law, working on some of our biggest contracts and advising our procurement specialists, And then you might find yourself going over to the Counterterrorism Mission Center and becoming an operational lawyer. So everyone is starting over again and constantly learning new practice areas. And that is a wonderful thing for the development of lawyers, and particularly for people who are agile and flexible and they're learning and want to spend a lifetime learning. It is something of a nightmare from a management perspective, because you have people moving all the time, and you need to make sure that we're doing that in a way that is, obviously responsible, that we're training people up on their jobs, that we're building enough duplication into the system so that that is all sustainable. But it's something that we're committed to doing that's sort of long been part of our lifeblood as an office. And it's a wonderful part, actually. It's a very important part of what makes us such a collegial office, because you may be a very senior attorney who's spent 20 plus years in our office, and you can find yourself, by choice, becoming a line attorney, right, with less experience on a given topic than someone who graduated from law school 6 years ago. It's this wonderful sort of, it has this wonderful equalizing effect, and it makes us all look to one another for expertise and for the knowledge that we bring to various problem sets, regardless of rank. And that is a part of what makes our office kind of special.
Yeah, I'm very interested to hear that. And I did not know that that's the way it worked in the CIA, because one of the things about the military I always enjoy was you move around and you kind of reinvent yourself. You might be, the claims, and then you go to another assignment in your operations or whatever. Yeah. But since we are talking about the military, this is one of my little bugaboos. The DoD Law of War Manual, which came out in 2015 and recently updated. It does, a lot of people don't realize, but there's a caveat in that document that says it only applies to the Department of Defense. How does that, how do you look at that within the CIA, which you might have reason to look at that?
And we don't have our own, the Law of War Manual, which, as those of you who know it well and who study it, is this great big tome, a very, very useful one. And we don't have something equivalent at CIA. We don't have a published manual that compiles all of our legal authorities, but our legal structure is comprised of many, for those of you who haven't studied intelligence law per se, it's comprised of many sort of overlapping legal authorities and frameworks. It always starts, of course, with the Constitution, and then we look at our statutory sets of authorities. And for CIA, unlike, and this is true across government, so those of you who are all very much experts in the way the practice of government law works. This always comes as a surprise to my private sector colleagues, but every legal question starts with do we have positive legal authority to do this? Not just, is there a prohibition on our doing this? Is there a statute that tells us, no, you can't? We first have to look for, is there a statute or source of authority that says, yes, you can. And for CIA, that usually begins with a look at our statutory authorities, right? The National Security Act of 1947 and the CIA Act. Those set forth our basic authorities, which for the CIA sort of fall into three basic buckets, right? The CIA collects foreign intelligence and counterintelligence, it analyzes and integrates intelligence, and it conducts covert action. Covert action then is governed by a whole separate set of authorities, which I'm seeing nods in the audience, so I won't go into this in great depth, but again, now defined by statute, how the president authorizes covert action pursuant to written findings that are then briefed to the intelligence committees. So all of these things form kind of our interlocking legal framework for positive authority. The can we do this? And then on the are there prohibitions side of this, we look back to those, we look to the Constitution again, you start at the top, we look at the Constitution, then we look at our statutes, and there are several very discrete limitations in statute, including in the National Security Act, things like, the CIA shall not exercise law enforcement authorities, shall not conduct electronic surveillance in the United States, et cetera, that come from both statutes and my set of examples from executive orders, with Executive Order 12333 or 12333 being really primary among them, setting forth some of our limitations for dealing in particular with U.S. person information. So every time our lawyers look at a problem set, they're always looking first, is there positive authority, and then is there negative authority, or are there express restrictions in law? And that's how we, that's how we go through our process.
Do the clients want your opinion, in particular, whether something's a good idea? In addition,
sure.
In addition to separating what the law is or permits or doesn't permit, do they want to know does Kate think this is a good idea? Or Kate's designate?
Yes. Well, I think that's one of the most important parts. It's one of the most rewarding parts of being an in-house lawyer. I think anywhere is, but particularly in the federal government, is being looked to as an advisor, not just on the yes, no, is this lawful, yes, no. I mean, if that's all we had to do, we might not need quite the structure that we have, where our lawyers are embedded with the clients, sit with the clients, work with the clients from germination of an idea all the way through to execution. I mean, one of the reasons we do that is so that we can be counselors as well as giving them just our straight up sort of legal advice about permissibility. And I don't think that counselor role is unbounded, and that's an issue that I think about a lot. I mean, I'm very careful, and I think we all are, to give advice within the parameters of our expertise. But I do think that lawyers bring a form of expertise borrowed from our legal expertise that makes us particularly good at looking at and assessing different kinds of risk, different kinds of process-based questions, where we're really weighing in fundamentally on, not strictly legal things. And we're very careful then to just not only to make sure that we're advising on that's a type of counsel for which we are competent to advise, but also that we're really clear on when we're doing that. I'm very clear to say, first, let me give you my legal advice on yes, no, whether this is permitted, and the agency has to listen to us on that. I'm the chief legal officer of the agency, so my view on whether something's lawful or not is the agency's view on whether it's lawful or not. So we're very careful about when we're giving that advice. When we're advising on things like the litigation risk or the legal risk of taking a position, and then finally when we're giving more risk-based counsel that is meant to be taken as counsel. And I really feel that we stand on the shoulders of giants in this regard. That over the decades, OGC lawyers over time have built up the trust and credibility that puts us in a position to give that third category of advice. And we're very, very careful to maintain that because we realize that that is purely on the basis of a trust relationship, that there's no reason our clients need to listen to us when we tell them what we think is a good idea or not. And it's something that I value very much in my relationship with the director and the deputy director and the other senior leaders of the agency.
Along that line, what's your typical day like?
Yeah. There is no typical day. That's the stock answer. This is part of what's so great about being in government and being in particularly in an environment that is as dynamic as the national security space. So, congratulations. I think we should all pat ourselves on the back for being interested in this space because it really is, it's just, it's so dynamic. Everything is so fluid, and that really makes for a lot of fun, and it makes a lawyer's job difficult and challenging. I remember on my first day, because being in this room is bringing me back, on my first day of law school, 1L year, I made the mistake of sitting close to the front of the room where my name placard could be read by then Dean Coe, who was Dean of Yale Law School, who I think seeing my difficult to pronounce last name immediately called on me first to answer a question about some case. And I dutifully, I always carry a book around with me as though I always need my sources. So I dutifully open my book to look at the page, and he goes, "You don't have time for the book." That was right. I'm not sure if those were actually his words at the time, but whatever he said scared me enough. And he later would always make this remark, you don't have time to look at the book. You've got to know it. And it's not just that you have to know it intellectually. In our field in particular, you've really got to have it built into your muscle memory. It's got to be an instinct for you how to answer that question. It's got to be an instinct. It's got to be something that you've practiced and sort of rehearsed, because it's not that clients are always asking for a question and answer on the spot. But it's that at some of the most important moments, if you don't raise the objection or flag the issue in the moment, other things can start to fall into place that just make it much more difficult, that insert much more friction into the operating space than there needs to be by raising it at the end of the process, right? So I forget where we started off on this question.
Typical day.
But my typical day is that I spend a lot of time sitting in meetings in the director's conference room. The director and the deputy director receive briefings throughout the day on what's going on around the agency. These are briefings on intelligence, topics of interest, proposed plans. It can be management stuff as well, about the management of the agency. And so they're in, these series of meetings, and I'm invited to those, and I try to go to as many as possible. And I'm sitting on this is all in the director's conference room, and some of those junior officers I was telling you about that are so impressive, they're coming in to brief. And I sit in those, a lot of the work in another legal environment you might be able to do in advance. You might review the briefing material, give your legal comments, edit it, make sure all the periods are in the right place, those critical legal functions that we often serve for our clients, and then sort of be done with it. But in our dynamic environment, I find that there's tremendous, so much happens in the room, right? In the room where it happens. That really is the case, as many of you know, in our national security world, where we do so much in person, we do so much in meetings. Meetings are incredibly material to what's happening, and it's not all prescriptive. And so I sit in those meetings in order to flag issues that maybe we haven't thought about yet, that are coming down the pike, to hear the way people are describing things, so that as we're trying to put together the kind of factual background for a legal matter that we're looking at, we've all heard it the same way. It might be articulated different ways, different times. We want to be there to ask the questions. We want to be there if there are legal questions that arise, but more so that I am just up to speed in spotting legal issues and risk-based issues against the full range of what is on the director, the deputy director, the chief operating officer, and our senior leaders' plates. So that's a huge part of the day. Then the other part of the day is spent, back in my office with attorneys only, attorneys and paralegals and law librarians, working on those issues that we've seen come up. So I walk away from these meetings. Sometimes I've got a long list, of topic areas, things I've just heard about. This one I hadn't heard about before. What's this? Can someone explain this one to me? Heard about this proposal. Have we already looked at that? Where's our legal? So that's all the sort of back office work to make sure that OGC is offering the legal support that we need. And then the third thing that I do is participate in interagency meetings with my colleagues, the general counsels of the other national security agencies, as we think about sort of issues of common concern. And that's kind of how the day breaks down.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, how much colloquy you have with the ICE GCs and the IC community, because my experience, dated, but everybody wasn't always on the same sheet. It was always very courteous, but
I don't know what you're talking. We always agree completely. This is actually one of the highlights of my job. I mean, the first highlight is getting to work, at the agency to support the mission that we get to support, and second, with the colleagues that we get at the agency. Our clients at the agency are incredible, and the lawyers, as I said multiple times now, are just a phenomenal group. But the third, thing I'm thankful for is this group of interagency lawyers who I get to work with really on this daily basis. I have so much respect for the other general counsels and their teams, and we know them quite well. We spend a lot of time together with them. We have something that some of you may have heard of called the Interagency Lawyers Group, which is a group of the agencies, CIA, State Department, DoD, DOJ, Treasury, it depends on the issue, that is convened by the National Security Council, by the legal advisor to the National Security Council. And we meet regularly to discuss issues, legal issues concerning, the government's authority, the president's authority on a national security issue, on which, the legal advisor is essentially looking for our views and our help and assistance, so that we can reach consensus, or if not consensus, be able to tease apart and be very clear for the policy clients, where our areas of disagreement are on issues about, presidential authority and whatnot. And we also meet sometimes to talk about our own authorities, just to basically have a sounding board, in another agency. And finally, we talk about things where there's a big national security challenge, and the question is, what tools in the government's toolbox do we bring to bear against this? And so we each come and we say, this is the authority my agency has, this is the authority my agency has, this is the, and we talk sort of about how those things can be cobbled together to be most effective against whatever challenge it is.
we're, unfortunately, because I have like 6,000 other questions, but we're running out of time, and I want to get to some student questions. And Riley Flewelling, my the co-president of the National Security Law Society, had this question. People have historically been worried about the politicization of the intelligence agencies, and there's been an uptick in those conversations lately. How do you balance being a political appointee, and I think you're one of only 3 in the agency, and guiding the agency that needs to run smoothly from administration to administration? What are your thoughts on partisanship different in your role with CIA as opposed to past political appointments that you've had?
I mean, the agencies.
Not that it's a hard question. But.
No, and not, and it's interesting that in my career, including sort of at the time of the WMD Commission, there've always been questions. This question, as you note, arises historically. The agency has always been very clear, and this is part of a part of who we are, right? That the agency is designed to provide the real truth, the straight truth, that there's no place for partisanship whatsoever. And that is just something that's sort of inherent to the mission, that's essential for us to carry out our jobs, and something that we are very, very careful to underscore over and over again. We've got an inscription at the agency, you shall know the truth and it shall make you free, right? And that's the idea behind the analysis. We've got to speak truth to power. That's something you hear a lot at the agency that is just drummed into us, regardless of whether that truth is hard to deliver, isn't in someone's interest, but that's our job. That's what we do. As you mentioned, there are only 3 appointed, Senate-confirmed political appointees at the agency: the director, the general counsel, and the inspector general. And so that's a very small number compared to other agencies. It's just kind of a different, which I think is a reflection, really, of that principle as well that we're talking about.
Another student question. We covered a little bit of this, but this is much for the law students here. What was the most helpful background experience that assists you in your current role, class in law school, national security law, law of war and conflict, and use of force? I happen to teach those.
I wish I'd had those courses. I didn't have any of those courses available.
Interestingly enough, when I went to law school, I don't even think we had international law. And to the extent to the extent we had IP, it was strictly patent law, and you had to literally be an engineer. Yeah. But what do you think? And let me add on this, so maybe take them both. What is the most unique aspect of being an attorney in the IC? And what skills are transferable, non-transferable outside the agency?
So let me take, these are great questions. In terms of skills, skill sets or experiences that have been most useful, it's hard, of course, to sort of tease them apart, but there were a couple things that left an indelible impression on me, and that sort of trained me to think in a way that I don't think I would have gotten elsewhere. And the first thing that comes to mind is the experience of being a law clerk. It's bizarre that we take our most, and this, is not always the case because now very experienced people also become clerks, but in my time, there were a lot of people who were coming straight out of law school and going to work for federal judges. So we take our most junior lawyers, we put them with our most vaunted and experienced ones, and we let them be their assistants for a year, which is really extraordinary. I learned so much about the importance of precision in writing in a way that you were just not tested to do anywhere else. It is certainly not something that's essential for being a successful legal academic or really a successful law student, but that is absolutely critical when you are helping people to write Supreme Court opinions or Court of Appeals opinions. These things are going to live on forever. Every word of them is going to be picked apart, analyzed 6 different ways. And so watching that muscle be exercised, trying to exercise that muscle myself, that was very formative, and I think has served me extremely well in jobs later on. And the second skill set is one that I really learned at the White House, and then that I had to hone in private practice, which is, it's sort of in tension with the first, which is, how you take a very complicated idea and put it in a single talking point, right? What is, if you've only got the president's attention, or, I'm using the president as an example, you've only got a senior leader's attention or a senior client's attention for the 30-second elevator speech, or more likely the 10 seconds that they can pay attention, that they're really focused on what you're saying. How do you boil down what you're saying into the single point? And that skill is another exercise that I think we're not taught in normal life. And that's extremely valuable when you need to get your point across and we need to be precise about it. So those are the 2 skills. And on the second part of the question about transferable skills, we're teaching people to be great lawyers in an environment in which legal problems are not handed to you on a plate, right? It's not like being at, in some practices, let's say in an appellate type practice or at a law firm, or even some of the work that is more litigation focused, where you're being handed a discrete legal question saying, look at this, study this, give me the answer. In our practice, you are in the operating environment, you're in the room where people are talking about things, or you're reading the plans, or you're reading and you are having to do the law kind of in that natural environment. You're having to give the advice that shapes the way someone is thinking about something from the get-go in a way that doesn't feel didactic, and that they don't have to read 10 pages to get to your bottom line. So, that's a skill that I think you learn in these jobs that is quite transferable, even if some of the legal topics of specialty are not, that can really make people phenomenal counselors.
Let me ask you a question. Something I tell, and wouldn't work obviously with the president, but I tell people in the military and government, when I really needed to communicate with a senior person, I used a handwritten note, because I felt that they always read the handwritten notes, sometimes with some real trepidation. Why doesn't he want to put it electronically? Do you ever use that, or would you recommend that?
You must have better handwriting than I do. I write handwritten thank you notes, and I write handwritten. There are so many ways in which at the agency we've got sort of and this is true at the Supreme Court too. There are kind of these old-fashioned traditions, because we don't have our phones with us all day. We're not, we use sort of more of the paper process. So I do write handwritten notes sometimes as kind of annotations on, this is why I'm giving you this, and this is why, but I can't say that I think I haven't written a long form analytic piece, short analytic piece in handwritten.
I'm going to break my very strong, because we are time on target right now, but I want to give you another 10 or 15 seconds if there are any words of wisdom you want to leave with the audience.
Oh, no, I would just say take advantage of the opportunities that you have like this. It's incredible that you, to be together with a group of like-interested professionals for, these little capsules of time when you get to sit back and really think about these issues and form connections. And I'm jealous of all of you. This seems like this is so much fun. I wish I'd had this opportunity when I was a law student. And thank you so much for having me here today. I will be around. I'll hang around for a couple minutes, and my colleagues, I've got a couple of my colleagues who are here I'll have them come down too, so you know who they are, and we've got some handouts and things if people are, if I've whetted your appetite at all for potential interest.
Swag?
We have some swag. If you come down here and talk to us,
I want swag. I want CIA swag. No, Kate, thank you so much. I can't begin to thank you.